Hey, APUSHnation, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or wherever you are watching in this weekend. Could be internationally, since now apparently the APUSHnation base is growing all over the world. Um, let's get down to business right away here. World War I has ended, and we left that off in class the other day. First, I want to just give you some more background on the Spanish flu, because, boy, the details and the numbers on the Spanish flu are just absolutely shocking. And so I want to give you guys some context here. I'm going to pull up some statistics that I have to give you guys more details. And I'll throw in a link if you want. Stanford has a great site about the Spanish flu. Now, the flu began, the deadly strand of the flu that began in Europe. It's hard to pinpoint sort of exactly where this disease happened. The Spanish flu is believed to have begun somewhere during World War I in Europe, most likely in France, where so many of the battlefields had actually been fought on the Western Front. I mentioned this earlier in the week about the Spanish flu when we did the Edward Cullen team trivia question. And the issue is, the flu gets very little mention in history books. And that's mainly because the carnage and the death toll that the world witnessed during World War I, the 10 million deaths, it just shocked and numbed the world to the idea of fatality. And the flu, which came at the very tail end of the war, also got overshadowed by the peace process. That's what we'll be doing later on the video, and also in class on Monday. And so everybody was sort of rejoicing, the war is over, and now let's focus on peace. And then all of a sudden, the world's worst pandemic in history, yes, that is in history, the worst pandemic in world history happened right at the end of World War I. Now, the numbers here are difficult, and I'll tell you why. It's primarily because the casualties from the war, the death from the flu, sometimes the lines were blurred. And, just to give you some context here, more people died from the Spanish flu in 1 year than the 4 years that the Great Plague, Black Death, in the 1300s killed. The flu was also known as La Grippe. That was what it was called in Europe, La Grippe. And here on the Stanford site, they estimate between 20 and 40 million people were killed. Now, that's a pretty broad range. And like I said, sometimes it's because to pinpoint the number that died as a result of the flu is a little bit difficult. An estimated 675,000 Americans died of the Spanish flu. 675. That is 6 times as many Americans that died in World War I. That is just incredible. That's just incredible. So many American soldiers that fought in Europe were primarily the victims here of the Spanish flu. But the flu came back to the United States, and there were outbreaks all over the world of the Spanish flu. But here in America, there were deadly outbreaks throughout the United States. And the flu was most, and this is what was unusual and baffled scientists back then, but now today we know a bit more. The flu tended to hit younger adults, in their 20s and 30s, much harder than most diseases, which usually prey upon the immune systems of the elderly or the youth. But in this case, the specific strand of the Spanish flu, and I know you guys are all math and science people out there. You probably know a lot more than I do about viruses. But the specific strand of the Spanish flu targeted the healthy immune systems of young adults, which is why it killed so many people. It was hard to beat. And so the flu it wreaked havoc all over the globe. And like I said, feel free to read through this article that I'm going to send you guys, because, it gives a lot of anecdotal evidence and whatnot. And, one of the cool things here for our purposes is the Red Cross, the American Red Cross. is believed to have been, this is where the Red Cross really like stamped its name in world history. And the Red Cross efforts, not only with the Spanish flu, but even World War I, really made the Red Cross the international go-to humanitarian effort. So basically, I guess what I want to just make sure we get out of this Spanish flu issue is that this sent shockwaves around the world, and it gets overshadowed primarily because the fact that it happened right at the end of World War I. And so as a result, people kind of overlook it, but I don't want us to overlook it, and I'll tell you why. Number one, believe it or not, this was actually the DBQ topic on the World History exam 3 years ago. So because the Spanish, that should there right there then and there tell you that the Spanish flu's importance in world history was enough to make it onto a DBQ for world history. That's a big deal. So the College Board clearly sees this as a viable topic, not just for APUSH, but for world history. And I'm not saying that it's a guarantee that it will be on our test, but I want you guys to be aware that this had a direct impact here in the United States, and there were outbreaks all over the United States as there was the rest of the world. And to pay it all off, and here's our transition point to our next topic, Woodrow Wilson actually got stricken with the flu. He did not die as a result of the flu. Luckily, he was able to stave off death. But when he was in Paris negotiating the Treaty of Versailles at the Paris Peace Conference, Wilson actually came down with the Spanish flu. So he was able to survive, but he would eventually die of a stroke not that long after peace was achieved. Now, speaking of peace, I mean, that's going to be the big focal point for us today, and that's going to be what we kind of get into on Monday, which is how the United States saved the day at the end of the war. Well, the United States is going to come into the Treaty of Versailles, and they're going to look to save the day once again. And so, that begs the question, all right, well, how was the United States going to come out of this entire end of World War I? And for Wilson, Wilson took his ideas of moralism and he brought that right into the Treaty of Versailles. And this is actually one of the more underrated aspects of the Paris Peace Conference, where they signed the Treaty of Versailles. At the end of the war, before the war even ended, Wilson came up with his list of 14 points for peace. And these 14 points, I'm going to put this up here in a minute. I'm just going to leave this on the screen for a while I'm rambling. Wilson's 14 points were his goals for creating a lasting peace in the world. And I want to make it clear, he released these 14 points before the war actually ended. So Wilson has his 14 points, and some of the highlights I'm going to hit upon. Freedom of the seas, so no more U-boat attacks or anything like that. Open diplomacy, therefore countries discussed issues and came together to try to solve problems versus what we know happened with the treaty, with the series of alliances. Removal of economic barriers, so free trade, very, very radical idea, very radical concept Wilson was bringing out. He went into very specifics about territories in Russia and Belgium and France and Italy and Africa and the Balkans. He wanted to really redraw the map of Europe, which is a very sanctimonious idea, considering Wilson was not even European. Reduction of armaments. I mean, I could go on and on. You see all these things right there. But of all the things that really Wilson pushed for, it's the League of Nations. And this was his baby. This was his brainchild for making sure that nothing like World War I ever happens again. Wilson pushed and pushed and pushed for the creation of a League of Nations. And so throughout the Paris Peace Conference, the activity we're going to do, and boy, I'm telling you guys, you're going to love this on Monday. We're going to actually role play some of the key players that were at the Treaty of Versailles signing at the Paris Peace Conference. And of course, some groups will have to play Wilson, and we'll have a couple others like the Prime Minister of Italy and David Lloyd George, who's the Prime Minister of Britain. So we're going to have these guys, and we're going to go into this, and it's going to get pretty fun. And it's really important that we look at this from the American perspective, and that's kind of, as much as we're doing this European stuff. So heading into the peace conference, Wilson has his 14 points, and the biggest point of those 14, of course, is the League of Nations. And so one of the things the activity is going to stress, it's going to help regurgitate some of the information that you guys know already with or I should say from Euro and world, which is the reparations, the punishment of Germany, the taking away German lands and territories in the Pacific and in Africa. So this is going to rehash a lot of those issues. But I want us to just, again, keenly focus on one thing, and that is that America is going to come out stronger, better, more diplomatically powerful than before the war. The United States is going to be able to say constantly over there in Europe, we bailed you out, it was our help, you needed us to come over there. And that kind of sets in play this continuation of Wilson's moralism and the idea that America is the savior. Wilson and America kind of take on this savior complex. But the irony is, back at home, Woodrow Wilson had the Treaty of Versailles, it's going to get cut down. It will not be ratified here in the United States, which means the League of Nations will die. And one of Wilson's primary adversaries, here's a name to write down, Henry Cabot Lodge. Henry Cabot Lodge. That was a Republican senator who fought tooth and nail to kill the Treaty of Versailles. And so he and Wilson would endure a great battle. And this is one of the theories as to actually why Wilson had his stroke. He endured such a tumultuous tussle with the, that was nice alliteration, by the way. He endured such a difficult time passing the Treaty of Versailles back in America, even though the Allies in Europe had supported the treaty, that Wilson eventually he got gassed. His body broke down, his mind broke down, and he suffered a stroke, and he would die shortly after the treaty was chopped up on the operating table. So that's pretty much it for today. I kept things pretty light. I kept it moving. Just to give you a heads up on what we're doing before the spring break at my big Singapore trip. Basically, we're going to look at the Treaty of Versailles activity on Monday. Then we're going to talk about how American society changed. On Tuesday, we've got Fordism. We've got life in the 1920s. I got a cool reading for you guys. There's just a lot of great stuff going on down here in APUSHnation. So again, to all our viewers out there, thank you for coming in. As you guys know, the past shapes the future. Have a great rest of your weekend. Good luck on those mocks. Take care, APUSHnation.